If you've ever wondered to yourself, dang, Job for a Cowboy have enormous dongs for basically popularizing deathcore and then realizing it was creatively limited, so they decided to become death metal gods. How the hell did they do that? Then you've come to the right place. Be sure to stick around until the end where I dive into what exactly propelled them to become death metal gods in their ultimate final form, and do exactly what other bands of their genre just couldn't do. But first, we're going back in time to 2004. It's 2004, MySpace is incredibly popular and is filled with tons of emotional 14-year-old kids thinking their life is too hard and therefore need angsty music to fill the void that their brain isn't formed enough yet to fill. And 3 Days Grace just isn't doing it for them anymore. Oh, and Halo 2 came out, and that's where deathcore comes in. But it's not the deathcore that you and I know and absolutely fucking despise. At this point, you have bands like Antagony and Despised Icon really forming the genre in the underground, and it doesn't suck absolute balls. In come Job for a Cowboy uploading their first demo to MySpace, and this does 2 things. One, it sends all these eyeshadow wearing, long bangs, angsty kids into a crazy frenzy thinking they found the heaviest shit ever and now think that they are death metal fans. And 2, it pigeonholes Job for a Cowboy into a label that would follow them until the present day, preventing a swath of metal fans from truly experiencing what this band would eventually offer. But we'll get to that. First, let's be real about something. Despised Icon and Antagony may have started deathcore, but it wasn't until the release of Job for a Cowboy's legendary Doom EP that deathcore took off and became the phenomenon that would take over metal in the late 2000s and early 2010s. That explosion would lead to bands like Suicide Silence, Whitechapel, Carnifex, The Acacia Strain, you know, the brutal scene kid shit. Bands trying to play the heaviest shit possible. I mean, look at Job for a Cowboy's logo. It clearly inspired 90% of deathcore logos going forward. But like we said earlier, Job for a Cowboy would go from deathcore to death metal. What was it that spurred this change that is basically unheard of in deathcore circles? The vocalist Johnny Davey told Metal Sucks back in 2020, quote, "We didn't have any real intent to change. I think our first couple of tours naturally influenced the change. We did a run with Necrophagist, just the ultimate respected band at that time. We did a big run with Cattle Decapitation and Animosity. We wrote the Doom EP when we were 16 years old, so think of how different you are when you're 16 to 18, 19. A lot of stuff changes, especially musically. In the end, I think it was a pretty natural progression. Even with that said, when we released that, going back to the backlash we received, that didn't seem to help either. It almost seemed to make things worse. We just couldn't win. It was humorous when we look back at it. And this makes so much sense in the context of their later music. Let's take a deeper listen to Job for a Cowboy's music and lyrics on Doom to get a better grasp of the, pardon the pun, genesis their music would take going forward. And we will also compare their sound to other deathcore bands that were around at the time to truly get a grasp for the difference between Job for a Cowboy and other bands in their scene. holy fuck, deathcore sucks. This clear difference shows that Job for a Cowboy was on pace to become the death metal gods they would eventually become. But the sign of a true genius, a true master of their craft, is the drive to grow, to get better. So how would Job for a Cowboy capitalize on their momentum? How would they continue to grow and define their sound that was already way ahead of its peers? And who are the band members that would make this possible? While the early sounds on Doom would be defined more by singular parts or sections carrying each track, on their next album, Genesis, their music would become much more well-rounded. The sound being carried more by a whole song or theme of the album than merely the individual riffs or measures within each track completed this maturation from deathcore to death metal. When the band released Genesis, it was a huge surprise to anyone that was following the band. Genesis was a straight-on death metal banger, one of the best of the 2000s. I mean, aside from Opeth and Cannibal Corpse, you really didn't have much in terms of death metal going on in the 2000s, unless you like Bloodbath, the most overrated band in death metal ever. But this album, more so than any of their others post-Doom, got shoveled in as a deathcore album as well, mostly by elitists who didn't want to take the time to check out their music based off of their first EP. But nothing could be farther from the truth. So Genesis was a true progression, a theme we would continue to see from Job for a Cowboy, but this would lead to some lineup changes for the band that would alter the course of their music. The lineup changes of Job for a Cowboy are well known. Maybe not Mega Dave levels of well known, but it would have an effect on the band. It was at this point that Rafi Badriharu would go back to medical school, and the band brought in former despised Icon guitarist Al Glassman. The band also brought in John the Charn Rice to replace Elliot Sellers on drums. Now, one would think that when your guitarist and your drummer both leave, that it would cause a drastic shift in your sound. But there wasn't a drastic shift from Genesis to Ruination per se. It was more of a refinement, and it was this refinement that we would continue to see as Job for a Cowboy went forward. But what does that refinement sound like? Let's talk about that after we get to the lineup changes that this band had. The combination of Ravi and Bobby Thompson on Genesis and Doom brought a groove and melody to the sound that made Job for a Cowboy's music filled to the brim with fleeting fretwork and an undeniable essence that was unlike every other band in the scene. And then with Al Glassman and John Rice, it became more condensed and roped in, more focused. Johnny Davies' vocal talent was also integral to this refinement, with his range being incredibly wide, from deep gutturals to high-pitched screams. The writing focused less on placing Johnny's vocals directly in cadence with the rest of the instruments and allowed him to flow more with the music, even lead the rest of them on Ruination. They also focused on using his higher-pitched vocals that weren't really heard on Genesis. And of course, this was all brought together by legendary metal producer Jason Swaykoff. This guy has become sort of a modern-day Scott Burns, and his genius truly helped in the refinement from Genesis to Ruination and every album after. You could say he really cut his chops as a producer on Ruination. Everything became tighter, more clear, especially when it comes to the drumming. A greater focus on upping the density and a more methodical approach to the drumming, Jason Swaykoff brought the true latent brutality out of Job for a Cowboy with his unique approach to drumming in metal. Jason Swaykoff said this to Ultimate Guitar back in 2009 about drumming in metal. To me, they are the most important thing on an album. I really believe that if you don't have an awesome drum sound on a metal album, then the rest of it will just sound weak. You can have an awesome guitar tone and an awesome vocal sound, but if the drums sound like weak or papery, I think that the rest of the album will be sounding like a complete joke. Amen to that, brother. Let's take a quick listen to the differences between Genesis and Ruination. This sound is overwhelmingly more focused on pure death metal, even leaning towards a more tech death-like sound, which would foreshadow things to come. By Ruination, the band that you first heard on Doom was long gone, replaced by a more mature and driven band. A big strength of the band, lyrics, even became more mature and refined, with Genesis being a whole concept album and Ruination dealing with topics like disinformation, government overreach, and human rights. Quickly becoming the biggest band in death metal, their next release, the Gloom EP, would be their final as a pure death metal unit, because some new additions at bass and guitar would sprinkle in some new influences that would be integral to their continued growth. In particular, the addition of bassist Nick Shenzelos was a boon to the fulfillment of the potential the band showed early on Doom. Nick brought a unique attack to the bass that was much different to those that came before him, and that would be the key to unlocking the final form of Job for a Cowboy. But more on that final form later. If we take a listen to Nick's previous band, Cephalic Carnage, and compare it to how Job for a Cowboy sounded on Ruination and Genesis, we can get a better understanding of how he would influence Job for a Cowboy going forward. Not only is there a clear technical difference in the way the music is played, the bass playing itself is so unique and impressive. Basically, on Genesis and Ruination, Job was perfecting their death metal chops. With Nick bringing his technical ability he honed with Cephalic Carnage, they'd be able to take that next leap that other deathcore bands just would never be able to take. And that next leap would come in their next full-length release, Demonocracy, in 2012. And with the release of Demonocracy, Job had gone from the scene band all the MySpace emo brutal kids love to the technical death metal heroes that neckbeard elitists love to whip out whatever some normie would say U2 was the best band ever. And would you believe me if I said they weren't even done there? The transformation to technical death metal on Demonocracy was just another step in the full transformation of this jaw-dropping band. And their next step would be the most drastic one yet. At this point in their career, Job still had the connotation surrounding them of being just another MySpace scene band, playing boring, simple music with an over-reliance on breakdowns. But you and I both know, after what we've listened to in this video, that that's simply not the case. Job for a Cowboy had become one of the true flag bearers for death metal over the first 8 years of their career to anyone open-minded enough to sit down and ignore all the fluff around what their earlier music may have sounded like. The stain of being labeled deathcore followed these guys for 10 years. Hell, it follows them to this day. And it's a shame because Even Doom, while it is deathcore, doesn't follow the same baseline formulaic vomit the scene has spewed out continuously since its inception. Like we saw, they were continually ahead of the game when it came to their music. Whether it was Johnny Davey explaining his unique and impressive vocal range, or the inclusion of Al Glassman and Tony Santacandro propelling their guitar playing to the next level, or the amazing production that Jason Swaykoff brought on every album, and the growth he would make production-wise with the band. What we've seen so far is the willingness of all the members of Job for a Cowboy, no matter what their background in music, to grow and continually redefine what their music means to them and what they want to deliver. And as we dove deeper into their sound through Doom, Genesis, Ruination, and Demonocracy, we began to piece together what Job for a Cowboy could eventually become. Job for a Cowboy could have easily rested on their laurels after the release of Demonocracy, but a true genius would not rest on their laurels at all. They would continue to grow and define their art form. And finally, with the release of their album Sun Eater in 2014, Job for a Cowboy's previous 10 years culminated in a death metal masterpiece. Every change that came before it was subtle, inching slowly along the way to a more technical, mature sound. But with Sun Eater, their potential exploded in full force, completely shedding any sound that had been associated with them prior. When I think about the best progressive and death metal albums released in the 2010s, this album stands solidly beside each of these. Some of the most clear, immaculate guitar playing I've ever heard, especially on songs like Son of Nihility, have my jaw on the floor to this day. Davey's vocal delivery has matured to the point of legendary status with guys like Michael Ackerfeld and Corpse Grinder. The drumming is so tight and perfectly placed in the mix, I've never heard anything like it. And the bass playing, oh lordy, the bass playing. This is one of the most pristine bass tones I have ever heard in metal. The production is immaculate, perfect, arguably Jason Swaykoff's opus. The band's songwriting has been ultimately perfected. It's impossible to truly understand the weight of this transformation through words. So here is one last comparison of all their previous music to that of what they have on Sun Eater. Please enjoy. And then after that monster masterpiece, immaculate album, just radio silence for 10 years. The band members didn't do much publicity for it, and as far as I can tell, no tour. We were left to sit with this masterpiece of an album for 10 years before anything else would come out. 10 years to stew on what could have been. I'm trying not to speak too much about their newest album, Moonhealer, that as of recording hasn't been released yet, because I don't want to date this video too much. But it sounds every bit as promising as Suneater. We'll see if they can continue their growth, but what else could they possibly do? They perfected every form of death metal possible. Job for a Cowboy entered this world on an absolute heater, a banger, and popularized an entire genre of music on their own, then left it behind to grow, prosper, and plant their flag atop the death metal heap. And they left that flag on top, leaving their name among legends, leaving us to wonder what could possibly come next. And we'll see what they have in store for us in the future. What we do have is the undeniable genius of Job for a Cowboy. Thank you so much for watching until the end. As you've noticed, there's quite a bit of music in here, and that makes it challenging for me to monetize these videos. So if you'd like to buy me a coffee every month, go down below and check out the benefits of being a patron. Thank you so much. But everything I've said in this video is pretty dumb because Atheist wrote one of the greatest progressive death metal albums of all time, and you can check out my video for that right here.
Job for a Cowboy went from death metal to tech death, but death did it first. And here is a video about their legendary album Leprosy that you can check out right here. Till next time, long live metal.